The scalpel slipped in my hand, wet with blood and something else. The 4K cameras were still rolling when I saw it. A titanium capsule sutured into my patient's bowel, and inside, a note in my dead wife's handwriting. The gallery glass shattered as Michael Davis swung the oxygen tank, screaming my name. Now I'm holding the scalpel like a weapon, my patient bleeding out, and the world watching as my life unravels. The note says I'm a murderer. The cameras say I'm guilty. And the man with the tank? He's not done yet. The overhead lights hummed, a sterile drone echoing against the polished linoleum of the Northwestern University surgical suite. David Miller gripped the scalpel, his knuckles white beneath the latex gloves. Before him lay Arthur Sterling, a landscape of pale, parchment-like skin and dark iodine stains. Every movement David made, every flick of the wrist, was broadcasted in crystal-clear 4K to millions of digital voyeurs across the globe. The room smelled of ozone and the sharp metallic tang of cauterized flesh. David began his rhythm. 1, he whispered, his voice a low, steady vibration behind his mask. He made the first incision. 2. As he retracted the intestinal wall, a metallic glint interrupted the crimson mess. He paused, his heart thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Nestled against the bowel, stitched with a meticulous, non-medical precision that made David's skin crawl, sat a small titanium capsule. "What the hell is this?" David muttered. The camera above zoomed in, the silver cylinder magnifying until it dominated the wall-sized monitors. David sliced the silk sutures, his fingers steady despite the mounting dread. The capsule rolled into his palm, heavy and ice-cold. He unscrewed the cap, pulling out a sliver of synthetic paper. "Dr. Miller?" Sarah Johnson, the lead nurse, whispered. Her eyes darted toward the lens of the live stream camera. "We are live. Millions are watching." David ignored her. He unfurled the note. Black ink bled into the fibers, forming words that felt like a physical blow to the stomach. "Arthur Sterling killed my daughter. The police bought their silence." David felt the air leave his lungs. The chat feed on the wall exploded into a blur of scrolling text, a digital riot of accusations and shock. This wasn't just a surgery anymore. It was an execution being watched by the world. The pressurized seal of the heavy theater doors hissed open with a sudden, violent gasp. A crash shook the floor, vibrating through David's surgical clogs. Michael Davis stood in the threshold, a man David remembered only as a face in a malpractice file. He was dragging a green oxygen tank by its brass nozzle, the heavy metal scraping against the tile with a screeching, rhythmic wail that set David's teeth on edge. Michael's hospital gown hung limp off one shoulder, and his eyes were bloodshot, fixed on the unconscious Arthur Sterling with a terrifying intensity. "Step away from him, Miller," Michael rasped. His fingers tightened around the valve, and the heavy tank swung like a pendulum. "Step away, or I'll turn this room into a crater." The air in the theater grew thick, the smell of Michael's unwashed skin and stale hospital food clashing with the sterile scent of the OR glass shards from a nearby equipment cabinet crunched under Michael's feet as he stepped forward. David looked at the monitors. The live feed was still running, capturing the terror on Sarah's face and the glint of the oxygen tank. "Michael, put it down," David said, his voice dropping into the soothing, clinical tone he used for panicked patients. "He's open. If I stop now, he dies." "That's the point," Michael screamed. He swung the tank, and it caught the edge of the glass partition, separating the theater from the observation gallery. The reinforced pane didn't just crack, it shattered into 10,000 diamonds of light. The sound was like a gunshot. a deafening explosion of pressure that rained down on the sterile field. David didn't think. He didn't count. He lunged. He tackled Michael just as the man raised the tank for another swing. They slammed into the floor, the cold linoleum biting into David's knees. The oxygen tank skidded away, clanging against the base of the operating table with a sound like a tolling bell. David pinned Michael's arms, feeling the wiry strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. Michael's breath was hot and smelled of peppermint and rot against David's neck. "You ruined me," Michael hissed, his knuckles cracking as he clawed at David's surgical gown. "You and your perfect hands. You left me with nothing." David pressed his forearm against Michael's throat, not to choke, but to hold him. "Security, get in here," he roared. The heavy doors burst open again, and 3 guards in blue uniforms flooded the room. They pulled Michael off, the man's heels dragging across the floor as he continued to scream about theater of lies and broken parts. David stood up, his chest heaving. He looked down at his hands. They were covered in a mix of Sterling's blood and the dust from the shattered glass. He turned back to the table. Sterling was still there, his chest rising and falling in the shallow, mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. "Is the patient stable?" David asked, his voice shaking. Sarah was already at the monitors, her hands flying across the touch screens. "Vitals are holding, but the field is contaminated. We have glass in the cavity, David." She reached down, picking up the synthetic note that had fallen during the struggle. She smoothed it out, her eyes scanning the jagged handwriting. David watched her, waiting for the judgment he knew was coming. But Sarah's face didn't show judgment. It showed a paralyzing, bone-deep fear. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "I know this handwriting." David stepped closer, the smell of the room, the ozone, the blood, the sweat, suddenly overwhelming. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" "This isn't Sterling's writing," she said, her fingers trembling against the paper. "I spent 3 years as your head of research. I saw the letters she left on your desk every morning. I saw the grocery lists." She looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "This is your wife's handwriting, David. This is Emily's." The world tilted. David felt a cold prickle dance across his skin, the kind of chill that came from a grave. Emily had been dead for 4 years. A car crash on a rainy Tuesday. "That's impossible," he choked out. Before he could process the impossibility, the heavy doors hissed open for the 3rd time. Robert Evans, the chief of surgery, strode in. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he straightened his silk tie exactly 3 times. Duty, honor, profit. Before he even looked at the blood on the floor. His predatory eyes scanned the room, landing on the shattered glass and then on the titanium capsule sitting on the instrument tray. "Miller," Evans said, his voice a smooth, paternal purr that made the hair on David's neck stand up. "Explain to me why my flagship live stream looks like a crime scene, and why there is a piece of unapproved hardware inside a Sterling." "We had an intruder, Robert," David said, trying to regain his professional footing. "And this hardware was sutured to the bowel. It's a setup." "It's a disaster," Evans corrected him, stepping closer. The smell of his expensive peppermint breath filled the small space between them. "The board is in a frenzy. The legal team is already drafting the fallout reports. And you, David, are holding a scalpel over a man who might be the key to your own incarceration." Suddenly, a new sound joined the chorus of the OR. A wet, rattling gasp. David spun around. On the table, Arthur Sterling's body jerked. His hand, previously limp, clenched into a fist, the knuckles turning the color of old bone. "The anesthesia," Sarah cried out, her voice rising in a sharp spike of panic. "The delivery system. It's bottoming out. He's waking up." The monitors began to shriek, a high-pitched, rhythmic wail that vibrated through the floor. Arthur's eyes flew open, not with awareness, but with the raw, animal terror of someone being sliced open while conscious. He began to thrash, his torso heaving against the restraints. "Get the propofol. Now!" David shouted, lunging for the IV lines. But as he reached for the controls, his hands began to shake. A fine, vibrating tremor he hadn't felt since he was 10 years old, watching his brother bleed out on the playground. "The tray!" Sarah screamed. Without warning, the heavy stainless steel tray of surgical instruments, the clamps, the needles, the saws, tipped over. It didn't just slide. It was as if an invisible hand had swept it aside. The crash was deafening, a cascade of metal hitting the floor that sounded like 1,000 falling coins. No one was near it. "I can't get a reading," Sarah yelled over the alarms. "The system is locked. David, his heart." The green line on the monitor, the one that represented the rhythm of life, suddenly went flat. A single, continuous tone filled the room, the sound of a soul departing. "He's flatlining," David roared. He didn't wait for a tray. He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed the rib spreader. "Open the chest. I need to get to the heart." He sliced through the muscle and bone, the sound of the saw a jagged, screaming protest. He reached into the chest cavity, his hands disappearing into the warm, wet heat of Sterling's torso. He found the heart. It was still, a heavy, unmoving weight in his palm. He began to squeeze. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head, his voice a silent drone. 4, 5. "Miller, stop!" Evans shouted from the periphery. "You're going to kill him on camera. You're making it worse." David ignored him. He was a god of the OR, and he would not let this heart stop. He squeezed again, feeling the muscle beneath his fingers. 6, 7. "Doctor, look out." Sarah's warning was a split second too late. Rebecca Thompson, the junior resident who had been standing in the shadows, suddenly lunged forward. Her eyes were wide, frantic, reflecting the red emergency lights of the monitors. She grabbed David's shoulders, her fingers digging into his muscles with the strength of pure hysteria. "You're killing him!" she screamed, her hair escaping her surgical cap in wild strands. "I saw the note. You're executing him. I won't let you be a murderer." She pulled with everything she had, her weight dragging David away from the table. His hand slipped from Sterling's heart. The monitor's flatline tone seemed to grow louder, more accusing. "Get off me!" David barked, trying to hook his leg around the table to stay upright. "I'm saving him." "No," Rebecca wailed. "You're the fire, you're burning everything." She began to tap her sternum. Thump, 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 thump. A desperate, rhythmic ritual of a girl lost in a memory of smoke and ash. Sarah jumped in, grabbing Rebecca's waist, trying to peel the younger woman away. It was a frantic, clumsy shoving match in the center of the sterile field. Blood from David's gloves smeared across Rebecca's white coat. The smell of sweat and fear was suffocating. Finally, a security guard who had lingered by the door stepped in, pinning Rebecca's arms and dragging her back toward the shattered glass. David lunged back to the chest cavity. He grabbed the heart again. It felt colder now. 1, 2, 3. "David," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "The capsule. Look at the capsule." David glanced at the instrument tray where the titanium cylinder sat. A small blue light was now pulsing on its side, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat of its own. A tiny hiss, like the sound of a snake, began to emanate from the metal. It's a release valve, David realized, the blood draining from his face. It's not just a note. It's a delivery system. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the nurses, the technicians, and the chief of surgery. The capsule wasn't timed. It was waiting. Someone in this room was holding the trigger, watching the heart under David's hand, waiting for the perfect moment to turn a surgery into a poisoning. "Nobody moves," David commanded, his hands still rhythmically squeezing Sterling's heart. "There's a toxin in that device, and one of you is about to release it." The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The only sound was the squish-squish of the heart in David's hand, and the distant metallic screech of the L train passing outside the hospital walls. "David, we have a bigger problem," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a hollow, dead tone. She pointed at the abdominal cavity. Beneath the mess of the intestinal surgery, a dark, pulsing bulge was forming on the great vessel of the heart, the aorta. It looked like a bruised fruit, the walls of the artery thinning until they were translucent. "An aortic aneurysm," David whispered. "It wasn't in the scans." "It's leaking," Sarah said. As if on cue, a spray of bright, oxygenated blood hit the overhead lights. It happened in slow motion, the vessel wall finally giving way, a crimson flood beginning to fill the cavity, swallowing the anatomy, hiding the capsule, and drowning the very heart David was trying to jumpstart. "I can't see," David shouted, reaching for the suction. "Get the blood out of there. I need a bypass." But the suction didn't kick in. Instead, the hum of the room, the steady, comforting drone of the hospital, simply died. The lights flickered once, twice, and then vanished. The OR was plunged into a terrifying, absolute darkness. A second later, the emergency system groaned to life, bathing the room in a ghoulish, blood-red glow. The backup batteries whirred, a low-frequency vibration that rattled David's teeth. "The power grid," Evans muttered from the shadows. "Someone cut the main line." "Sarah, find the manual pump," David yelled. He kept his hand on the aneurysm, feeling the hot, high-pressure spray against his palm. He was flying blind in a sea of red. In the corner of his eye, David saw a shadow move. It wasn't Sarah, and it wasn't the guards. It was a figure emerging from the equipment closet, moving with a silent, predatory grace. The red light caught the glint of a scalpel. Not a surgical one, but a heavy, industrial blade. "James?" David gasped. James Miller, David's cousin, the man who had spent his life fixing the hospital's vents and cooling systems, stepped into the light. He was humming, a low, tuneless version of Nearer, My God, to Thee. His grease-stained fingers were wrapped tight around the blade. "You always had to be the hero, didn't you, Davy?" James said. His voice was thick with a lifetime of resentment. "The big doctor? The man who counts the stitches? Well, the count is over." James lunged. David didn't have time to let go of the patient. He pivoted, using his shoulder to block the strike. The blade sliced through his surgical gown, the cold steel grazing his ribs. David felt the sting of the cut, the warmth of his own blood blooming against his side. "You did this," David hissed, his hand still clamped over the leaking aorta inside Sterling. "The capsule? The note from Emily? She would have wanted you to see the truth," James said, circling for another strike. "You're not a savior. You're just a man who's too busy counting to see the world burning around him. Evans paid the bills, but I did the work. I put that little gift inside Sterling. And now I'm going to make sure you're the one who takes the blame for the leak." James swung again, the scalpel whistling through the air. David reached out with his free hand, his fingers fumbling in the dark until they hit the heavy, plastic casing of the defibrillator paddles. He didn't wait. He didn't check the settings. He grabbed the paddle, felt the hum of the stored charge vibrating through the handle, and slammed it into James's chest. "Clear," David roared. The arc of electricity was a blinding white flash in the red room. James's body jerked, his back arching as the current threw him across the theater. He hit the equipment rack with a sickening thud and slumped to the floor, unconscious, the scalpel clattering away into the shadows. David didn't look back. He turned to the table. "Sarah, the capsule, give it to me." "David, it's a toxin," she cried. "It's not," David said, a realization hitting him like a physical weight. "Look at the color of the liquid in the reservoir. It's not clear. It's deep amber. That's not a poison, Sarah. It's a concentrated clotting agent. The experimental one the university has been hiding." He grabbed the capsule, his fingers slick with blood. He saw the legal paper tucked behind the amber vial, a confession signed in his own handwriting. "I, David Miller, admit to the falsification of surgical records regarding the death of Emily Miller." It was a trap. If he used the agent to save Sterling, he would have to pull the paper out. He would be holding his own ruin in front of the cameras. "If I open this, the world sees that confession," David whispered. He looked at Arthur Sterling. The man was a mule, a vessel for corruption, but he was also a human being whose heart was currently failing in David's hand. David looked at the monitors. The live feed was still flickering on the backup power. The world was watching. "Count with me, Sarah," David said. "What?" "Count. 1, 2. David ripped the capsule open. He didn't look at the confession. He crushed the vial, pouring the thick, amber liquid directly onto the leaking aneurysm. He felt the chemical reaction, a sudden, intense heat that smelled like scorched earth. The blood began to thicken, turning into a heavy, rubbery seal that closed the hole in the aorta. Sterling's heart gave a sudden, violent twitch. Then another. The flat line on the monitor broke, replaced by a slow, stumbling rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. "He's back," Sarah breathed. "David, you did it." The heavy doors hissed open. This time, it wasn't a guard or a technician. Jennifer Vance, the hospital's legal counsel, stepped into the red light. She held a stack of papers in one hand and a grocery list, milk, eggs, sourdough, in the other. Her face was a mask of cold, legal precision. "Dr. Miller," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I have a warrant for your arrest. The live stream has provided more than enough evidence of malpractice and criminal negligence." David stood tall, his hands still inside Arthur Sterling's chest. He reached into the open cavity and pulled out the synthetic confession. He held it up to the light, pointing at the bottom of the page. "Look at the timestamp, Jennifer," David said. "The digital watermark. It was generated 45 minutes ago, while I was already in surgery. It's a deep fake, planted by your technician and authorized by Robert Evans." He turned his gaze to Evans, who was backing toward the door, his hands shaking as he reached for his tie. "Arthur Sterling wasn't a patient," David said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had walked through fire. "He was a suitcase. Evans was using him to smuggle the patents for the very clotting agent I just used to save his life. The note, the intruder, the power failure. It was all a distraction to make sure Sterling died on the table so the evidence could be buried." Jennifer Vance paused. She looked at the paper, then at the man on the table, and finally at Evans. The list writer in her seemed to click into place, the logic of the law finally aligning with the reality of the room. "Security," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Detain Mr. Evans." The room began to fill with people. Real police this time, their flashlights cutting through the red gloom. David didn't watch them lead Evans away. He didn't watch the technicians scramble to restore the power. He stayed by the table, his hand on Arthur Sterling's shoulder. He counted the last 10 stitches out loud, his voice a steady, rhythmic drone that seemed to anchor the room. 98, 99, 100. The wound was closed. The rhythm was held. An hour later, David walked out of the hospital's main entrance. The Chicago air was crisp and smelled of lake water and exhaust. The L train screeched overhead, a sound that usually made his teeth ache, but now felt like a song of the living. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't check the news. He didn't check the viral clips of his struggle. He looked at a photo of Emily, the way she laughed when she was messy, the way she never cared about the count. He wasn't a god. He was just a man with steady hands. David turned away from the towering limestone of Northwestern and began to walk toward the south side, toward the small community clinic where the linoleum peeled and the chairs didn't match. He had spent his life trying to cheat death through precision. But as the sun began to rise over the lake, he realized that the only thing that actually mattered was the pulse you felt when you stopped counting and started listening. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't check his watch. He just walked.